Welcome to ExcelBerry. In this video, we will go through the Excel interview questions that I've used to recruit new business controller, a role that contains a lot of Excel. Would you ace the Excel test? Let's find out. So it contains of 5 different questions and also 2 sheets with data. The candidate opens the Excel file and try their best to complete the questions. The first question is get the data for each berry for the month and city below. The month down here is a drop-down list and also the city is a drop-down list here. And we have our budget sheet with the data. The first thing you should do is to look through the data and see if it looks all right. It seems to look all right. So then we would think of a function to use. And in this case, we would use the SUMIFS function with the S in the end, because we have 2 different criterias. And also I usually only use SUMIFS because it's easier to only learn one. So SUMIFS, sum based on one or multiple conditions. So we want to sum the values here if the month is equal to the month down here, and this one we need to make as absolute. The D and C column is not necessary to make absolute because we will only fill it down and not to the left or to the right. And then the second criteria should be if the city is equal to the city down here, also absolute. And then the third criteria should be that the berry is equal to the berry here. And we don't need to do this as an absolute. If we would, it would only be absolute to the column and not the row, because we want it to be filled down. And then we close the SUMIFS function, and then we will copy it down and see the budget for the berries in Copenhagen in February. And if we change this one, it will change correspondingly. That's the answer to the first question using the SUMIFS function. Let's move on to the second question. Make a line chart showing the budget trend for blueberries in Stockholm. Here I want to see how the candidate works with charts, and if they can make a very simple chart with the blueberries in Stockholm. I would go to the data. I would probably make this a table. Control L is the shortcut. Okay. And then we will have the filter options that we can easily filter the blueberries and Stockholm here. So here are our 12 data points that we want to use for our chart. Then we select the cells and we select the headings, holding down the control button. Now we only select these 13 rows and we go to insert, and here are our line chart. We could control X or right click and press on cut. Go to our second question and paste it here and perhaps make it bigger. This is a very easy chart showing the budget trend for blueberries in Stockholm. And that's the answer to the second question. Then we have the third question, and that is create a pivot table with slicers for the cities and berries, and all headings should be dragged into one of the boxes. And this tests the candidate's knowledge with pivot tables, and pivot tables are used so much, and if you're familiar with it, it's not a difficult task. Let's go to our budget sheet and remove the filters, and then select the cell in the data. Go to insert, pivot table, from range. Let's place it in an existing worksheet where the question is. And now we want to use all the headings, so let's just try to press on all of them and see what happens. This looks not so good because it is more than 200 rows. let's place, for example, months in columns instead and zoom out. This looks better. So perhaps we select our data and convert it into numbers with 2 decimals. We Control-Shift-1 and then decrease the decimals. Now it looks good. And now we want to add slicers for cities and berries. So we go to our pivot table analyze, insert slicer for both the berry and city. And now we have slicers for those two. So if we want to see the blackberries, it's easily done. If we want to see them only in Stockholm, we could use the slicer for cities. And that is the answer to the third question. Moving on to the fourth question. Here is the task to convert the values in the amounts here into Swedish crowns. And we have the exchange rate up here. And this is a task with many solutions. For example, you could do an if function that would take a lot of time because you would nest if functions within if functions. You need 3 different if functions. You could use ifs, which would save you some time, but also it would take a lot of time. For example, if this cell here is equal to this cell here, if it is, then I want it to be this cell. And then you do this 3 times and see each time which one it is. And then you multiply it with the amount here. The easiest way I'd say is to use the XLOOKUP function. You look for the currency here in the array up here. You need to make it as absolute references. And then the return array should be the cells here. And also absolute on these. And then you could close the bracket. So here you could see that you will get the exchange rate for the Danish crowns. And then you multiply it with the amount. And then if you copy it down, you will see that it will correctly, for example here, and get the Norwegian crowns and then multiply it with the amount. That's one way to solve this question here. And then our final question is that I want to get the units sold for the month and the berries. So we have a month here, also a drop-down list. We have the different berries, and we want to have the units sold for that month and that berry. And we have it in a sheet here. So it's in a matrix, and you need to know how to get a value where you want to match on both the headings and the column names. So that needs either an index match or an XLOOKUP nested into an XLOOKUP. I'll use the second option because it's easier. So XLOOKUP, I want to look for the month up here in the units sold. Let's take these here, and the return array should be another XLOOKUP function where we look for the blueberries in the berries here, and then our return array in our second XLOOKUP function should be our data here. And then we close the second XLOOKUP and then the first XLOOKUP. And then we have 0 here. If we change the month, it will change here. So in May, blueberries, let's see if it's correct. May and blueberries, 214,000 in both cases. So that's how you do an XLOOKUP within an XLOOKUP instead of using the index match. So perhaps you learned something new there. And that's the questions that I use for my Excel test when I try to find new candidates who will work a lot in Excel. And that's all I wanted to show you in this video. Like if you learned something new, subscribe if you want to learn even more in Excel, and go to my Excel course on excelberry.com. Thank you.